Today we will be hearing about UDAP C# reference implementation, a hands-on tutorial from Joseph. Ready, Joseph?
Yeah.
Okay, over to you.
I don't have a fancy PowerPoint like everyone else with my name up there. I probably should have done something like that, but I work at SureScripts in the US, and historically over there I worked on a thing called the Direct project, which was heavily about PKI, like public key infrastructure, and securing messages that way. And UDAP is an extension to OAuth 2 and OIDC, right? But with a PKI kind of an extension. So this, I got it 2 years ago. I wanted to work on it, and I didn't get a chance, 3 years until recently. And I guess it's been more than 6 months that we put into it. And so this is a tutorial to show that has a FHIR server that's written in C#, how to host UDAP metadata on a FHIR server. So you see my 3 objectives up here to try to keep me on a path. And hosting a UDAP dynamic client registration on an identity server. And when I say identity server up there, I actually mean Duende's Identity Server. So FHIR people, that's what they use for their authorization framework also. And then the third thing on there is I want to actually secure the FHIR server. So I'll bet, has anybody looked at this and done any of the prerequisites? It wasn't labeled a build it talk when it probably should have been, but this is here and it will live on. And if you go in here and you go and experiment with this, feel free to put PRs in or put in issues, and we can make this better. So I imagine I would do this talk again in the future, and it would probably look a little different. So for the prerequisites, there is a project called, it is the source. Why does this keep popping up on me? Let's go over there real quick. Kind of losing my voice from allergies. Wrong place. All right. Actually, that is a test tool that I use to test this. Let's go to, all right. This is a fork in my repo. I do all my builds for this project here in this fork. The official one you can see up here, right, is in UDAP tools, right up here. That's in the UDAP tools. That's the official place where it lives. Over there, you'll find a few other reference implementations. Well, you'll find one other reference implementation, and it is a Java one. Right now, in another room, Brett Stringham is talking about TEFCA, or not TEFCA, he's talking about the Security IG, he's talking about FAST, all this kind of stuff, but not about that. But he is working on that, and I'm going to actually help him out a little on that one too. All right, that's irritating. I'm hitting the escape button probably, and that's what's happening. No. Okay, so a bunch of prerequisites. I pulled down that code that is the code that builds all these packages, has a bunch of sample servers. You can see in there's a UDAP client, right? Here, that's a package. That's obviously the client. You would think you would do the client first, but actually I did everything but the client first officially, and the client is now formulating into something that you could use. I'll demonstrate in here some of the stuff that it does that is complete. If you go to the README page, there is a table of all of the features and where we're at on it, and you kind of get an idea from there. But in this, here, there is a thing called udap-ed. It was in the prerequisites. You should have it up and running because it's a great test tool. It's called udap-ed.firelabs.net if you just want to go on the internet and grab one, but I need it locally for what I'm doing. That is irritating up there. It's weird. Should be up and running. It does have some peculiarities sometimes about loading. Looks like it's coming up. It's probably something to do with the different internet connection. In the meantime, let's go back to get past the prerequisites. I'm trying to see if there's anything interesting in here to mention. Tutorial. A bunch of extra stuff in here that I don't want to just stand up here and read. Begin the tutorial. So the first item, right? The FHIR server. This server is just, Brian Postlewaite has a FHIR server that's just a file-based directory setup, and I picked it way back in the day. If we get through this fast enough, I actually can show you in that project. There is you might have seen it, had the word Vonk in there somewhere. It's a plugin that does work inside of the FHIR server for hosting metadata. So if we were to go through this, go get this package, right? And add the service. There's some configuration option here. And then you use UDAP metadata server so we can add it into the pipeline. That's essentially all the code that you have to do to get this going. There is some configuration. A little bit in the app settings. I need to know where the authority server is, so that's why that's there. And then the other more interesting things, I actually have 3 separate sections in here for this UDAP metadata options. And once I'll show it to you here and you kind of visualize what it is. Get rid of that. Did it come up? It's in a different window. There we go. Oh, that's going to have to be bigger. Really slow. Come on. I did not tell that to run debug mode or anything. Let's try that again. You guys can ask questions at any time also. And that's better. So for the spec for this, up here on the top, you see the FHIR icon. If you click on it, it's going to take you there. The idea in this tool is a thing called udap-ed, which means UDAP education. I created it because I needed to do authorization code flow and needed a UI, and I'm like, okay, I'll do this, and then pretty soon, I'm like, I really want to visualize more of the stuff, and once upon a time, when I worked back on the direct stuff, I wanted to visualize certificates more because it's kind of a mystery for most people. I probably only met, it's like maybe 1 or 2 people ever that I've worked with on those old projects that actually could absorb certificates and that kind of stuff. Most people, it's just a mystery. This code, if you, in the DevDays one, actually there's a command line tool that generated all the certs for this. So there's 3 communities, 3 different PKIs. One is your standard RSA client cert. There's an intermediate cert, and then there's the top level authority. We call it an anchor. I'm also running this. I think this stuff is really interesting. I'm running in here. Let's zoom in on that. So that right here is that item that generates the certificates for you. So it's going to have stuff like AIA extensions. So I have the anchor installed in my database, and I have chosen a client, but I don't have the intermediate. And to build the chain, you need all the certificates. So there's an AIA extension that points to where the intermediate is. This is pretty normal stuff. In fact, I think everybody that we've interacted with, well, there's really, that comes down to only 2 things, EMR Direct and TEFCA certificates. They publish all these on the internet, so you can discover the intermediates. This is, that happens in this actual demo. Right there is a UDAP certificate server. It's just a static server to host it locally, because I think it's interesting to demonstrate the failure kinds of things that happen. And one of those communities has a revoked cert. So, and that's actually one of the value propositions of UDAP at scale, is that ability to revoke something. Like you have a client who's connected to, say, 1,000 servers, and for some reason they've been compromised. Today, if you have somebody that's connected to that many things, you get on the phone and you start calling people, right? And 50% of them probably don't even know how to fix it. But with this, we can just revoke the cert at the authority level, and it's just done everywhere in one motion. Okay, so that's some of the cool stuff that's included in here. The demo, or the tutorial for DevDays, has 3 branches. So if you want to go back and mess around with this, the prerequisite is where you would start and read all the instructions. And assuming I didn't do anything wrong, you'd be successful, and that you focus on what it actually says, because I've read my own instructions and done it wrong a few times this morning while I was trying to go through it. The FHIR server with UDAP is like step 2. Like if you said, I didn't really succeed in this, so I'm going to start from here, it'll set up the FHIR server with all the instructions correctly. And then the final one, the auth server with UDAP, it would be your final setup. And at that point, you should actually have a FHIR server running, an identity server running. You should be able to auto-register with it and get an access token and get some resources. I have 10 patients I uploaded in there from some Cynthia data. All right, let's go back here and see where we're at. So, description of the metadata. There's 2 sections in here. You see this UDAP metadata options, and down here you'll see a UDAP file cert manifest, which, if you notice the name here, not that name, the community name here, there's one in here and one in the top one. So top one's about metadata description, bottom one is how I find my certificates. Would you do this in production? No. There's a interface that you would implement, and then you would write code, talk to a database, or if you could talk to an HSM. If you're ever curious about doing that with an HSM, I did it in the direct project with C# using a PKCS11 interop library, which is another fun and cool thing to do. Okay, so imagine we did that. Next thing we would do is run something like look for a patient. Let's actually, rather than me typing it and you watching, I'm just going to switch to this branch. I heard Gino say this is the cooking demo. We're moving on to the next course that's already done. FHIR server, that. I like to use a tool called Microsoft TIE. Has anybody heard of it in here? Oh, come on. You guys are all C# people or not? Yeah, it's kind of a neat little utility. It's written by Microsoft. It's not a supported product, but it's been around for a little while now. Seemed like they're getting more activity lately, but it will run all my projects together and it'll host them in a portal. And so there's a YAML file where I could add more stuff. So you'll see once this loads up, I will launch it from this URL right here. I'm going to watch it and make sure there's no errors. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so there's the 3 servers that we talked about: FHIR server, auth server, and then that certificate server that's just hosting certificates. Like, you know, your security people would have a place where they hosted that kind of stuff. There's the links in here. I talked about going to patient. Let's go to patient. And we got nothing. Maybe it happens later on. I'm surprised. Let's try that again. Yep, no. Okay, that's fine. Let's act like there's no problem for now. The point of it was I was going to try to show is that you can go to the FHIR server, you can get a patient. It's not actually secured yet. I'm going to go ahead and run this utility, this tool, and run discovery. Again, these items on the left, this discovery registration B2B, those are sections in the IG, and that's how this is supposed to follow. Let's query that endpoint. We're querying, notice down here, right down here, it's actually, we put the base URL in, and then what it's doing is adding the well-known endpoint, and it's well-known /UDAP in this case, rather than say smart. And notice that it says there's no anchor loaded. That is that udap.client NuGet package that I'm showcasing right inside of here. And it is looking at things like the JWT token, and it's doing validation on that. So there's some validation at that level. And once you get past that, then you start moving into your PKI stuff. And so there are 3 hooks in there. So in the end, there's 4 events you can subscribe to, and it'll present those issues here. What it's saying right now is, hey, you don't even have an anchor loaded. So if you don't have an anchor loaded, me as a client, how am I going to be able to trust? How am I going to be able to trust this endpoint, right? Looks like I ended it somehow there. How am I going to trust this endpoint? All right. There we go. All right, run that again. No anchor. Okay. I need to upload an anchor. Yep. Talk about communities. Within communities, you probably have some kind of a trusted issuer of certificates, trusted PKI, right? That's issuing certificates. So you're going to have to load up the anchor in your client so that when you're talking to that FHIR server, you can say, yes, yep, I trust you. And what does that mean? It means that I have gone into this signed metadata area, which is a JWT, right? A signed JWT. And it's going to be probably different than what you've experienced in other signed JWTs, where you may have a public-private key. You might have the public key hosted on like a JWKS endpoint or something. In those cases, like, they're separate, they're not together. In this case, it's actually here inside this package. In the header is the public cert, right? So this is the certificate, and when it validates the token, it's using that. So you're like, well, that's not very secure because you just gave me everything, right? Well, that's just to validate the signature. The next step is we're going to build the PKI chain. And so this tool also has a certificate tab where it looks inside of there. And this kind of stuff is really good for connectathons because, or as a developer, you're doing this for the first time, because this right here, the subject alt name, copy that and search for it. You see it's up here. That's the base URL, right? You see it over here in the subject. That's in the spec, so it has to match up with all that stuff. And those kinds of things go wrong. Some people don't have the port in there. Notice that you can have multiple subject alt names. That's interesting, right? So as a server, I have to pick one of those, and the client or the server code actually has a decision tree process where it looks at what you're hosting it as and what you've got and picks the one that matches up. Or you can override it. Remember that app settings metadata stuff? You could override it over there. Okay, and so the next step is to go through registration. And registration in UDAP refers to not even say it because I'll say the wrong number, but there's a dynamic client registration, RFC, DCR, that this implements. When I started this, the guys from Duende had a PR that was just an experimental one. And I was starting it, and I'm looking at the RFC, and I'm like, okay, gonna have to start writing code and reading the RFC. And I mean, you still have to read it, but they had already kind of gotten their ball rolling, and that's where I started with. And at the last work group meeting, the emails came through as they were merging it into master. So my hope is that I'll revisit this, and possibly that piece might live with them, and I just need to hook in some hooks for the PKI piece of it. But anyway, let's load a client cert. And, you know, I haven't set all the rest of the stuff up. There's no way this is going to work, right? So I loaded up I clicked the test cert. Test cert on this tool, like if you're using it out on the internet and you want to like hit FHIR Labs, instead of you having to upload a cert, it'll let you do some things with that FHIR Labs local server rather than having to upload one of your own or getting a certificate. So this time I need the issued cert, the bottom of that chain. When I say the bottom of that chain, what do I mean? Let's cancel that for a second. I want to go look at it. PKI here, cert store. Right. The visualization of this, what I'm talking about is, right, this chain. So I'm loading up that localhost cert. That's the chain I'm talking about, and I have to build it. The code for this kind of came from the direct project. There were some opinions in there, and we kind of brought it over, and it was over time generating the certs and doing all this stuff. The .NET Core has come a long way. I don't actually I use some of it's very similar, but I don't ever use the Microsoft Machine Store. You can actually have your own certificate store now inside C#. And by the way, this code that's running on the internet, it's in GCP, Google Cloud, right? is all running Linux. In fact, it's when I went to do this, create this demo, I was doing it on Windows, and I found as a consumer doing this on Windows, I had two things I had to go fix. It was funny, it only worked on Linux. All right, so let's go ahead and do a build registration. As a client, this is another opportunity to choose your subject alt name. And why would you have a lot of subject alt names as a client in this case? Well, every certificate costs money. That's one thing, more maintenance. So you could pick a certificate, and you could actually have a lot of subject alt names. And when you register with a specific endpoint, you might use that as a strategy for different purposes of use, right? That's another subject. We've got these different signing algorithms that are capability. Actually, ES256 I haven't tested it with a client yet, but I do have an ES384 certificate generated actually in this demo. Community number 2 is elliptical curve. All right, build registration. This is in the spec. If you go read the spec, you'll find that this is what you have to do to build a registration. What I've done in here is given you the opportunity as a developer to go do bad things or good things, change your roles, all these kinds of things. When you go and get tested for this kind of stuff, they're going to do the same thing. And it's kind of nice to put your hands on it and see what really happens. Or if you're having an argument with somebody about how their stuff works versus, who's wrong and who's right, this kind of gets you both on the same page. Build request body. So it's basically kind of the reverse of the server-side metadata signature. Now as a client, we're doing that. And of course, you can see over here on the left, I don't have cert in there, probably because I have it up here, and register fail. All right. Let's go look and see what we need to do to hook up the rest of this. How's my time? We're at almost at 3 o'clock. How much more time do I have? 10 more minutes, we're right there. Had that feeling. So we talked about launching this guy. We got that. We continue down. So these are GIFs I kind of recorded. This is what it would be like to do some of this stuff. They'll be helpful. They could be better. You can give me more feedback. I can fix that up. Add authentication. Notice it's 3A. I have a 1, 2, and 3, but it's 1, 3A, 2, 3B. Yeah, I gotta come back to that sometime. So I do not have the connection right now from my FHIR server to an authorization server, and that is what this stuff is, right? And if you do C# and you've done things like bearer tokens, it doesn't look any different, right? It is the same. Because really, UDAP is done in like the first few seconds. It's after you're done and you got your client registration, you're actually doing mostly OpenID and OAuth 2 kinds of things. You're not doing this after a while. So what's important here, metadata server, I think that I call this out as being in a certain order, maybe. There's a require authorization that I've done here, so that the controllers are now protected. I'm not actually doing any role-based security at all. It's just you can get in or you can't. I haven't done that. I didn't want to implement that. I wanted to implement UDAP things, which is one of the reasons why I started to do a package for FHIRly, because I was hoping I could just use a server that has that already, and I would just connect the two and not have to write it. Let's continue down here. Let's see. Enable DCR, dynamic client registration on UDAP. So for the identity server, you would add this package as a udap.server package. What does it look like when you configure it? Well, you've seen add identity server, right? And usually you have a whole bunch of options in there. Well, this is just another extension for the udap piece. So I have some options in here. Those are documented in the README and the normal repo. I have another option for the database. In this case, we're just using SQLite. And I have a base URL. It's probably the most important thing that's in here is that I have a base URL that tells it where the registration endpoint is. Okay, let's see. And then in the pipeline, we need to add the udap server extension method here. And it has to come before identity server. There's some middleware that is in there. Identity server does stuff like when it responds to a request, it'll send back your application /JSON with the encoding UTF-8. And if you read the RFC and you go through the examples, it'll show that too. But if you read the errata, it says that that is no longer correct. You're not supposed to have it. That's a thing I had to solve. And then at least two more things, you'll see other middleware in there that I had to solve for behavior, for the expectations of how this is supposed to work. And specifically that first tool you saw that I brought up that's like udap, let's see, new tab, udap.org, test tool, udap.org. Last time it came up and I didn't even want it to. There we go. There's this tool. Touchstone has some stuff that they've been working on, and I've done a lot of integration work with them. But this one is like, I know that it works, and it's one of the things I go to test my stuff. If anytime I make changes, make sure things are still working. In the source code, you're going to find a lot of tests, especially around metadata, and especially around the server, this udap server stuff. A whole bunch of tests. They're pretty thorough. I'm pretty happy with them. The client stuff needs more work, but let's go ahead and light this up for. Oh, this is what's cool is. Did you notice when I put in our tie run, I also added a -- watch. So it's like, I think it's like the Microsoft run watch. It's watching to see if there's changes. It'll actually rebuild when I switch branches for me. So if I switch over here, I know this is not a demo on tie, but I'm just surprised nobody knows about it. There it is. It's finishing up. If we come back over to here, refresh. Those guys are all good. These are just, this is not part of the spec. This is something I added, this little convenience links, so you could click them and see what this looks like. Oh, this is, how much time do I have now? What is my end time? Oh, great. Does anybody want to start asking questions, or do you want me to just keep showing you stuff? You probably want to see me actually register, right? You're like, he did this presentation, he never registered once. Okay, let's go ahead and stay on the registration. We'll come back to that. All right, let's build registration again. Build the request body. Yeah, and of course, you know, this is, you don't go through all these steps. I'm doing this so you can see each step. Bad request, unapproved, trust is not a member of community. Did I do something wrong there? There. Did to that, we have the right one. I'm sure we have the right one. I just want to validate that. Go to registration, make sure FHIRLabs.net, that is, I don't think that's right. I never actually did this, did I? these passwords are not a secret. Every single one of them is udap-test, every one. So you can always be successful. Okay, now build registration. You notice we have a different common name up here, different subject alt names. Build request body. There, so we got back a client ID. We got a 200. 200 means actually I've registered before. All I'm doing is updating. Maybe I changed my my scopes. Now let's get an access token. We're in client credentials. There's authorization code flow, and it'll look a little different. You'll get redirected to sign in. Build access token. That was fast. That was really fast. And do a search for all patients. Yeah, so it worked. If I come back to discovery and I throw in this other community and load up, this community 3 is the one with the revoked certificate. We query, and you can see that it's been revoked, which is pretty awesome, right? So they wouldn't be able to do anything. Well, in this case, the server is revoked, so the client doesn't trust him, but if I use the issued certificate, it would have the same kind of experience. Questions?
There is one question in HUA from Ryan. He wants to see the B2B registration and how it's similar or different from the normal registration. He said it was too fast, so he couldn't follow that. So if you can show that again.
I wonder what I might do here, because both of these are considered B2B, even the authorization code flow. I'm going to do that. It's this similar kind of, it's B2B registration also. It does include a user authorization, but it's still in the B2B space. All right, software statement, and there. So I have two different client IDs. I have one for client credentials. I have another one for authorization code flow. That's why I got the 201 here. I'm going to move to the B2B, and you notice that here we are, authorization code flow. I don't have to load the client cert up because it's already loaded. This just happens to be here if your certificate session expires and you need to load it. Build the access code. This is different, right? Because now we're going to go through redirection. And I kind of slow everything down in time right here. I give you the opportunity to see what is going to get sent to the authorization server and the opportunity to break it. So you can change what's in here. And on that test tool, they're going to test this kind of stuff heavily. They're going to test, give you bad certs. They're going to do expired certs. They're going to do all kinds of stuff. View intermediate. So if I wanted to view what that intermediate process would look like as you're going through that two-legged redirect, you can see it. Because you really don't need to do that, but this is the button that you would have to push, right? That brings up the identity server. So now we're going to log in with Bob, or Alice. I use the standard ones that identity server usually picks. I don't want that to be hard. And there we go. We got redirected back to this page, right? Now we're going to build an access token. Right? We have a code, and we're going to cache it in for an access token. And you could change the signing algorithm right here if you wanted. So hey, let's do this with 384 instead. And client assertion. So we're building. This is just me prepping it, the thing that we're going to send. Post in, right? Form URL encoded. And when I push the button, that actual thing is what's going to go over the wire. I may over time, start to add more things that can be edited so that you can break it in more interesting ways also. And so now we have an ID token, an access token, right? I'll go back to registration again and do client credentials one more time in case the person asked the question wanted to see it. If you replay this in slow motion, you might be able to catch what's going on. Okay, there, let's do the registration. It's a 200, it's been updated. Go to the business to business section. We're gonna do client credentials. Let's build an access token request. You see these little toggles over here? These were there for old implementations. Probably gonna go away because those features are just never gonna exist. Get access token. There we go, we have it. You can take that over to Postman or just come here, right, and search. I mentioned that there is, and all of this stuff is in the README, and the README will take you to these different places. Let's do FHIR udap-ed.firelabs.net. This is the one that's running out on the internet. There's an identity server running. There's a FHIR server running. Then there's this tool also. Discovery. This home page has got information on it that's interesting. There's some, you notice all these links. Those are links to communities. Every one of those communities, I have fabricated a story essentially, and you can kind of tell the story by reading what it says in here, like an expired, right? Expired, revoked, untrusted. The subject is a mismatched alt name. Those are all fabricated so that you can go experiment with this anytime. So I hope it helps somebody that has to do UDAP to come up to speed faster.
Thank you, Joseph.
You're welcome.
Any quick questions from the audience here? Okay, I think all good. It was very good hands-on thing, and I think it was very useful for the people who are actually working in this space. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, everyone, for attending the session.